The tragedy of Mel Gibson is that he can direct every story in the world, except the story of himself. We remember Oscar night 1996, when he stood on the stage of the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion with two golden statues in his hands, Best Picture and Best Director for Braveheart, and all of Hollywood rose to its feet applauding an action star who had just proven himself a genius, the world looking at him as the embodiment of William Wallace himself, the indomitable rebel who sacrificed everything for freedom, who shouted freedom in his final moments and made millions of audiences around the globe weep. What we often forget is that only 10 years after that night of glory, the same man was photographed in the back seat of a police car in Malibu, drunk at 2:30 in the morning, screaming in the face of the officer that the Jews were responsible for every war in the world. 2 Oscars could not protect him, but Gibson was not merely an action star who lost control on a drunken night. He is a director who understands human suffering more deeply than almost anyone in the history of cinema. He recreated the final 12 hours of Jesus Christ. He told the story of Desmond Doss, the soldier who carried no weapon and saved 75 comrades through pure faith. He forced millions of people to confront the greatest questions about courage, sacrifice, and the darkest as well as the noblest nature of humanity. Yet off the set, where he controlled every frame and every tear, he seemed unable to apply any of the lessons he had told to his own life. How can a man see through the soul of humanity on the screen, yet fail to see through the darkness inside himself? How can the greatest storyteller of redemption be the one who seems never able to redeem himself? The man chosen by People magazine as the sexiest man alive in 1985, the first in history to receive that title, and also the man Hollywood boycotted for nearly a decade. The father of 9 children from 3 relationships, and also the man who pleaded guilty to domestic violence in court. The director of the highest-grossing religious film of all time, who put up $30 million of his own dollars when no studio dared to bet on it, and also the man accused of anti-Semitism by the very community that film depicted. He is 70 years old, still sitting in the director's chair, still standing amid the ashes, literally, when the Los Angeles wildfires reduced his 15-year home to dust. Today, behind the aging face of the man who once made the whole world cry over the sacrifice of fictional heroes, is a haunting question. Has the person who understands human pain better than anyone ever learned how to understand his own pain? Before we look through the glow of the spotlight to find the real man behind the myth, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like for Mel Gibson. To understand the fire that has burned throughout Mel Gibson's life, we must go back to where it was first kindled. Mel Gerard Gibson was born on January 3, 1956, in Peekskill, a small town less than an hour's drive from New York City, the 6th child in a Catholic family of 11 siblings. From the very name, faith was carved into the boy's identity. Mel taken from Saint Mel of Ardagh, a 5th-century Irish bishop. Colmcille taken from Saint Columba, the missionary who brought Christianity to Scotland. The boy bearing the names of 2 saints would grow up to become a man torn throughout his life between fierce faith and actions that betrayed that very faith. But before the world knew Mel Gibson, there was another man who shaped nearly his entire being. His father, Hutton Gibson. Hutton was the most complex and controversial figure in this story, a World War II veteran, writer, traditional Catholic activist, and a man who believed that the Second Vatican Council had betrayed the Church. Hutton loved his children the way only a father in a working-class family could love, absolutely, conservatively, and never in doubt. He saw extraordinary potential in his 6th son very early, long before any camera lens ever pointed at Mel. But Hutton also carried a worldview that would become a burden Mel could never fully shake off. For Hutton, Gibson would later appear on national television and publicly deny the Holocaust, claiming that the number of Jews who died was not as large as history records, and questioning the existence of the gas chambers. Yet Hutton was not a villain. In 1968, when America was sunk in political chaos and the Vietnam War was devouring an entire generation of young men, Hutton made the decision that changed the life of the whole family. He sold everything and emigrated to Australia because he feared that if they stayed, his sons would be drafted and sent into the jungles of Southeast Asia. That was an act of love, undeniable. A father uprooted an entire family of 11 children to protect them from war, and at the same time, The same father would pass on to his son beliefs that the world itself would later use to judge that son most harshly. Mel was 12, torn from everything familiar, friends, school, streets, accent, and thrown into a completely foreign country on the other side of the globe. The family settled in New South Wales, where his grandmother Eva Millett, an Australian-Irish contralto opera singer, had once lived. The boy kept his American citizenship but quickly developed a thick Australian accent, becoming a hybrid of two worlds, an American in Australia, an Australian in Hollywood, belonging completely nowhere, and that displacement of roots would follow him all his life like a silent crack no one could see from the outside. Beside Hutton stood another silent pillar that held the family upright, Mother Anne Patricia Riley, of Irish origin from County Longford, who worked as a nurse to support the entire household while Hutton grew ever more absorbed in religious and political activism. Anne was the one who kept everything stable when Hutton was a storm, the gentle hand when Hutton was the thunder. She died in December 1990, only 5 years before her son's Oscar night, meaning Anne Riley never saw Mel stand on stage with 2 golden statues in his hands, never knew that her shy little boy would make all of Hollywood rise to its feet. The greatest glory came after the mother was gone, and that detail, small yet sharp as a knife, sowed the seed of a motif that would repeat throughout Gibson's life. Loss always precedes glory, or glory always arrives too late. In 1974, Gibson enrolled at the National Institute of Dramatic Art, the prestigious NIDA in Sydney, and according to a story he has told many times, it was his older sister who secretly submitted the application without ever telling him, as if the universe itself had to resort to trickery to push the lost young man into the place where he belonged. At NIDA, he studied alongside those who would later become legends of Australian cinema, Judy Davis and Geoffrey Rush, but more importantly, he found what Ronaldinho found in a soccer ball, a refuge. Acting became the only space where the shy young man with the half-American, half-Australian accent, son of an extremist father, could become anyone else. Escape from himself, escape from Hutton's shadow, escape from the feeling of belonging nowhere. Yet from the earliest days at NIDA, teachers and classmates already recognized something in Gibson that no one else had, an almost primal intensity of emotion, the ability to burn himself completely in a role, and then emerge as if he had just walked through fire. That fire would illuminate him on the screen, transforming him from drama student into the biggest star of his era. But fire does not know how to distinguish between illuminating and incinerating. And the same source of energy that created genius on the set would also be the source of energy that destroyed nearly everything he touched outside real life. In 1977, a newly graduated NIDA student walked out of the school gates with a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree and not a cent to his name, and was chosen for a role in a low-budget action film so cheap that the crew had to use the actors' own cars to shoot the chase scenes. That film was called Mad Max in 1979. Director George Miller scraped together about 350,000 Australian dollars, a budget so small that the crew had to shoot on deserted roads on the outskirts of Melbourne on weekends to avoid permits, had to use the old cars of the crew members themselves as props for the chase scenes, and paid the lead actor a mere 15,000 Australian dollars. That lead actor was Mel Gibson, 23 years old. Fresh out of school, his face still bruised from a bar fight the night before the audition, and according to Hollywood legend, it was precisely that battered, wild-looking face that made the director see Max Rokitansky in The Unknown Drama Student. Mad Max was released and became a phenomenon no one expected. The ultra-low-budget Australian film entered the Guinness World Records as the film with the highest profit-to-cost ratio at the time, earning more than $100 million US worldwide from an investment of less than $500,000. The young man no one knew suddenly appeared on posters around the world, and just like Ronaldinho stepping into the Copa Libertadores for the first time, where no one expected him, where experience was supposed to crush raw talent, Gibson not only survived but completely dominated. Yet what set Gibson apart from every action star of his time was his refusal to be locked into a single mold. That same year, 1979, he starred in him playing a mentally disabled young man who falls in love with an older woman, a role that demanded tenderness, vulnerability, and a sensitivity completely opposite to the wildness of Max Rokitansky. Tim brought him the Best Actor award from the Australian Film Institute, the equivalent of the Oscar for Australian cinema, proving that behind the battered face on the Mad Max poster was a genuine actor capable of complete transformation. In 1981, Peter Weir's Gallipoli lifted Gibson to another level, playing a young Australian athlete thrown into the meat grinder of World War I on the Gallipoli Peninsula. The final scene of the film, when Gibson's character runs toward the machine gun nest in that last frozen moment, remains one of the most haunting images in Australian cinema, and it brought him a second AFI award. At 25, Gibson already had the two biggest acting awards in Australia and a world record-breaking action film. The fire was burning brightly, and there was not yet any sign that it would incinerate anything. Also in 1981, The Road Warrior, the sequel to Mad Max, with a budget and scale many times larger, carried Gibson beyond Australia's borders and turned him into an international action icon. He replaced the rigid muscular image of Stallone and Schwarzenegger with something entirely new: agility, danger, and an unusual psychological depth for the action genre, as if Max Rokitansky were not only fighting enemies, but also fighting the darkness inside himself. In 1982, The Year of Living Dangerously, his second film with Peter Weir, co-starring Sigourney Weaver as an Australian journalist in Indonesia during a political crisis, became the final stepping stone before the doors of Hollywood opened completely. And those doors opened with a punch. In 1987, Gibson took the role of Martin Riggs in Lethal Weapon, the self-destructive cop, reckless to the point that his partners did not know whether he wanted to catch criminals or wanted to die, darkly humorous in the most dangerous moments, and carrying inside him the pain of losing his wife that he hid behind a crazy exterior. Martin Riggs turned Gibson into an A-list Hollywood superstar. The four-film series, running from 1987 to 1998, grossed more than $950 million US dollars worldwide, and Gibson was no longer merely the action star from Australia. He was the embodiment of 1980s and 1990s Hollywood, the face on every magazine, the name on every power list. In 1985, in the middle of that fever, People magazine chose Gibson as the sexiest man alive, the first person in history to receive the title. He was only 29, already married to Robin Moore with two small children, living on a remote Australian farm, and the world loved him not only for his talent but for the man himself. The smile, the sea-blue eyes, the wild yet loyal look, dangerous on screen but a devoted father and husband in real life, equivalent to the way Ronaldinho was loved not only for his technique on the field but for the pure joy he brought. Gibson was loved for the rare combination of danger and reliability, of wildness and warmth. But Gibson did not stop at action. In 1990, he starred in Hamlet, Shakespeare's Danish prince, and proved to the critics that he was not just Martin Riggs with a handsome face. He could stand among the most serious actors of his generation. In 1993, he stepped into the director's chair for the first time with The Man Without a Face, directing himself and playing a man with a disfigured face, living in seclusion, shunned by society. And this was the first sign that Gibson no longer wanted only to act in other people's stories. He wanted to control the story. He wanted to sit in the director's chair, where every decision from camera angle to every tear lay in his hands. Gibson's career in the first 15 years burned upward in a straight line, each film larger than the one before, each role expanding the borders further than the previous one, each fire hotter than the last. But that is also the nature of fire. The stronger it burns, the harder it is to control. And no one in the 1980s or 1990s, not even Gibson, saw that the same source of energy illuminating everything he touched was also the source of energy that could reduce everything he loved to ashes. By the mid-1990s, Mel Gibson was already the highest-paid star in Hollywood, the sexiest man on the planet, the #1 action actor in the world, and a promising director. But he did not want to be promising. He wanted to prove it. He no longer wanted to stand in front of the camera. He wanted to sit in the director's chair where he controlled everything. And that decision, the decision to seize total control, would create his greatest masterpiece and at the same time plant the seed of his greatest collapse. In 1995, Mel Gibson bet his entire career on a gamble that most of Hollywood considered insane: self-producing, self-directing, and starring in Braveheart, the epic film about William Wallace, the 13th century Scottish warrior who led the uprising against the English crown and paid with his life. With a budget of $72 million. Shot in Ireland and Scotland with 1,600 extras in the blood-soaked battle scenes that revolutionized the epic genre. Gibson controlled everything, from camera angles to the color of the blood on the swords, from the rhythm of the war drums to the dawn light on the Scottish Highlands. And for the first time in his career, he stood not only in front of the camera, but also behind it, not only playing the hero, but creating the world in which that hero existed. The result was Oscar night in March 1996, the absolute moment in Mel Gibson's life. Braveheart won 5 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director, and Gibson stood on the stage of the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion with 2 Academy Awards in his hands. The action star whom critics had once dismissed now forcing all of Hollywood to rise and acknowledge that he was not merely Martin Riggs or Mad Max. He was an artist of a stature equal to any director in the history of cinema. That moment corresponded exactly to the night Ronaldinho made the Real Madrid fans, his harshest enemies, stand up and applaud. The enemy had to bow before genius, and the boundary between admiration and hostility was completely erased. But the bitterest paradox of Braveheart lay in the very line it left the world: freedom. William Wallace's final cry before execution, the cry that became a global cultural symbol, printed on T-shirts, quoted in political speeches, shouted in stadiums across the planet. Gibson had created the purest cinematic moment of freedom of the era, and would spend the next 2 decades proving that uncontrolled personal freedom can destroy rather than liberate, that the man who shouted freedom on screen was himself a prisoner of his own inner impulses. After Braveheart, Gibson continued to burn: Ransom in 1996, Conspiracy Theory in 1997, The Patriot in 2000, where he again played a warrior fighting for freedom, What Women Want in 2000, proving he could expand into romantic comedy, and Signs in 2002 under the hand of M. Night Shyamalan. Gibson remained Hollywood's top star, his name on every power list, and in 2004 Forbes would call him the most powerful celebrity in the world. But the true peak, the peak that surpassed even the Oscars, that surpassed even Ronaldinho winning the Ballon d'Or, came from a project that everyone in Hollywood was certain would be professional suicide. In 2004, Gibson put up $30 million of his own money to produce The Passion of the Christ, the film about the final 12 hours of Jesus Christ, shot entirely in Aramaic and Latin, with a level of violence that no religious film had ever dared to approach. Not a single major Hollywood studio would finance it. They said he was crazy, said the film would fail catastrophically, said no one wanted to sit for 2 hours watching a man beaten and crucified in dead languages. Gibson did not listen. He bet everything: money, reputation, career on his faith, with the same extremism he had inherited from Hutton Gibson, with the same defiance William Wallace had shown before the scaffold. And he was right. The Passion of the Christ grossed more than $612 million worldwide, becoming the highest-grossing R-rated film at the time, making millions of audiences weep in theaters, causing thousands of churches around the world to organize group screenings, and proving that Gibson possessed a capability almost no other director had: the ability to force the world to confront suffering at its deepest level, the level people want to turn away from but cannot, the level where art touches something beyond entertainment and becomes a spiritual experience. This was the moment Gibson reached his highest peak as an artist, not through Hollywood's applause, for Hollywood cold-shouldered the film, but through a direct connection with millions of people, crossing every language and cultural barrier, through the only language Gibson truly mastered: the language of pain. Yet inside the most radiant peak, the seeds of collapse had already begun to crack open. Even before Passion was released, the Anti-Defamation League, ADL, publicly accused the film of being anti-Semitic, arguing that Gibson's depiction of the role of the Jewish high priests in Jesus' death could incite religious hatred. The controversy exploded fiercely. Scholars, theologians, Jewish activists debated endlessly about the boundary between religious art and offense. And at the most sensitive moment, when Gibson needed every ounce of focus to defend his work, the shadow of Hutton Gibson fell like a black cloud. His father appeared on the radio and publicly denied the Holocaust, declaring to millions of listeners that most Jews had emigrated rather than been killed. Gibson was asked on television whether the Holocaust had happened, and instead of answering decisively, he spoke vaguely that it was a very difficult question, a moment in which the hesitation said more than any answer. For the first time, the public began to ask a question no one had thought of before. Who is the real person behind these films? Did the man who had just recreated the Passion of Christ with unprecedented artistic power truly believe in the love and forgiveness that Jesus taught? Or did he only know how to depict pain without knowing how to heal hatred? The Passion of the Christ was the strongest flame of faith in Gibson's career. But the flame of his faith was not the gentle flame of a monk in a monastery. It was the flame of extreme intensity, of fanaticism that accepts no compromise, of believing one is right despite every warning from every side. And the same source of energy that created the $612 million artistic masterpiece was also the source of energy that would create personal catastrophe. Because the man who believes he is right despite the whole world on the set is also the man who believes he is right despite the whole world off the set, and the difference between artistic genius and self-destruction sometimes lies only in whether the fire is burning inside the film or outside in life. By the summer of 2006, Gibson stood at the highest peak any artist could dream of. 2 Oscars, the highest-grossing religious film in cinema history, a fortune of hundreds of millions of dollars, a family of 7 children with the wife to whom he had been married for 26 years, the title of most powerful celebrity in the world from Forbes, and an artistic legacy that only a few directors in history could match. On July 28, 2006, at 2:30 in the morning, on a stretch of the Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu, Sheriff's Deputy James Mee spotted a Lexus LS 430 speeding at 87 miles per hour in a 45-mile-per-hour zone. The man behind the wheel was Mel Gibson, blood alcohol level 0.2% over the legal limit, with an open bottle of tequila sitting on the passenger seat. When ordered out of the car, Gibson tried to flee, had to be restrained and handcuffed, and in the back of the police car, the man who had just created the greatest religious film of the era, the film about Jesus Christ, who preached love and forgiveness to all humanity, uttered the words that would define him forever. The Jews are responsible for all the wars in the world. He turned to the officer, whom he had no idea was Jewish, and asked, "Are you a Jew?" He threatened to use every dollar he had for revenge, declared that he owned Malibu, and continued to spew hateful remarks until he was booked overnight, where he threatened to urinate on the floor and smashed a telephone. Deputy Mee's original report recorded all those statements, but superiors ordered him to rewrite a cleaner version, omitting the anti-Semitic parts, because Gibson was a celebrity and a close friend of the county sheriff, and because the situation in Israel was too sensitive. But the original report leaked to the website TMZ, and the failed cover-up only made everything infinitely worse. Now there was not only the anti-Semitic outburst, but also the suspicion that police had protected a celebrity. Gibson issued his first apology the very next day, but that apology was considered insufficiently sincere because it never specifically mentioned the Jewish community or what he had said. 4 days later, he issued a second apology, this time more complete. There is no justification, nor should there be any tolerance for anyone who thinks or says any anti-Semitic remark. I want to apologize specifically to every person in the Jewish community for the hateful words I spoke to the deputy the night I was arrested. I am a public figure, and when I say something, whether carefully considered or blurted out in a moment of insanity, my words carry weight with the public. Abraham Foxman, National Director of the Anti-Defamation League, replied that the apology was still not enough, and that when Gibson completed alcohol rehabilitation, the ADL would be ready to help him overcome the other addiction, which is prejudice. What must be stated clearly here, and this script refuses to evade, is that context is not an excuse. Gibson had battled alcoholism throughout his adult life. He admitted this after the arrest, calling alcohol the disease that had clung to him since youth. Alcoholism is a disease, and disease deserves compassion. But alcohol does not create ideology. It liberates ideologies that already exist. It removes the layer of control that a sober person uses to keep dark thoughts inside. The haunting question is not, why was Gibson drunk, but where did those words come from before the alcohol released them? From the family dinner table in Peekskill, where Hutton Gibson passed on his worldview. From the extremely conservative Catholic environment in which he grew up. From a dark region inside the man that even he did not fully understand. This script does not answer, because no one can answer, not even Gibson, but it poses the question, and that question will hang until the final sentence. Hollywood reacted almost instantly. ABC canceled the Holocaust miniseries that Gibson's Icon Productions was developing. Directors and actors publicly declared they would never work with him. Agent Ari Emanuel wrote an open letter calling for an industry-wide boycott, and Gibson entered the desert, nearly a decade pushed to the margins of the world he had once stood at the center of. But the desert was not yet the bottom. In 2009, after 31 years together and 7 children, Robin Moore filed for divorce and the settlement of approximately $425 million, plus half of all future film residuals, made it one of the most expensive divorces in Hollywood history. But the real cost was not in the numbers. Gibson lost Robin, the woman he had met when he was still an unknown drama student, the woman who had stood by him through Mad Max, through Braveheart, through the Oscars, through everything. The only anchor that had kept him stable for 3 decades. And when that anchor disappeared, there was nothing left to stop him from sinking. Not long after separating from Robin, Gibson began dating Oksana Grigorieva, a Russian singer and pianist, and they had a daughter, Lucia, in October 2009. But the relationship collapsed only 5 months after Lucia's birth, and what followed was the second layer of collapse. More brutal, dirtier, and impossible to blame on alcohol. In July 2010, 6 audio recordings of telephone conversations between Gibson and Grigorieva were leaked onto the internet, and in those tapes, a male voice unmistakably Gibson screamed threats, obscenities, racial slurs, including the use of the N-word. And when Grigorieva accused him of punching her in the face while she was holding their daughter, breaking 2 of her teeth, that male's voice did not deny it, but said she deserved to be hit. His agency fired Gibson the very next day after the tapes were released. Grigorieva filed for a restraining order, telling People magazine, "I am afraid for my life and for my daughter's life. I think he is going to kill me." And there was a text message, brief, cold, and heavier than any judgment an outsider could pronounce, that Gibson sent to Grigorieva the day after the incident. "Oksana, I was not safe for you last night. I spent 2 hours with a therapist today and have regained a little clarity." Gibson pleaded no contest to his misdemeanor battery charge in court. His own words, not the accusations of anyone else, not the interpretations of the media, but the text from his own fingers, created a weight that required no additional judgment from the narrator. And here this script must mention what the Ronaldinho story never needed to mention, because Ronaldinho in Paraguay was a victim of deception, while Gibson in Malibu and on the phone with Grigorieva was the one who inflicted harm. And his pain is not the only pain in this story. Oksana Grigorieva was struck while holding their daughter in her arms. Lucia, then only a few months old, was present during the violence. The Jewish community was offended by the hateful words from the man who had just told the story of Jesus Christ. Robin Moore and their 7 children watched their father and husband become the focus of worldwide disgust. Every loss of control by Gibson did not only burn his own life, it incinerated those standing closest to him, those who had not chosen to stand in the fire but were dragged into it because they loved him or because they carried his blood. The same source of energy that had created the emotional intensity that made the battle scenes in Braveheart so vivid they changed the entire epic genre, the same fire that had forced millions of audiences to weep before the suffering of Jesus Christ, now burned uncontrolled in real life. And fire does not distinguish between creation and destruction, between the set and the living room, between the role and the real person. It only burns, and everything within reach is consumed. Gibson entered the darkest decade of his life, losing his wife, losing his reputation, losing his career, losing the right to be regarded as a respectable human being. But he was still the father of 9 children, Hannah, Christian, Edward, William, Louis, Milo, Thomas, Lucia, and Lars about to be born. And his relationship with them, complex, painful, full of imperfection, and full of effort, would become the true test for the man Mel Gibson, the test that no Oscar statue, no box office gross, and no public apology could ever replace. Gibson has 9 children from 3 relationships, and each child is a mirror reflecting a different facet of the most complicated father in Hollywood. He is not the absent father type like Ronaldinho, who missed his son's birth because he was in Europe competing. Gibson is present in his children's lives. He is there, but he brings chaos with him. Robin Moore, his ex-wife of 31 years, testified under oath in the custody dispute between Gibson and Oksana that throughout 28 years of marriage, he never physically abused her or any of the children. And that sworn statement, coming from the woman who had every reason in the world to say the opposite in the middle of a $425 million divorce, carries a weight that cannot be ignored. But Gibson did not need to hit his children to wound them. His public collapse, the DUI, the anti-Semitic outburst, the audio tapes with Oksana, all unfolded under the global media spotlight, where any child could turn on the television and watch their father become a symbol of hatred. And that wound required no hand to inflict it. It carved itself into memory. Hannah, the eldest daughter, born in 1980 when Gibson was still an unknown actor shooting Mad Max on the outskirts of Melbourne, is the most private of the 9 children. She once worked as a production assistant on The Patriot and a makeup artist on What Women Want, then stepped completely away from Hollywood, marrying blues guitarist Kenny Wayne Shepherd in 2006. The same year her father was arrested for DUI in a quiet Catholic ceremony in California, and now has 6 children of her own, making Gibson a grandfather. Hannah represents the most stable part of the Gibson family, the part Robin Moore built in 3 decades of quiet while her husband was busy conquering the world. The twins Christian and Edward, born in 1982, display 2 completely opposite reactions to the same shadow. Christian followed the film path, working as a cinematographer, living a semi-nomadic life between Los Angeles and Mexico City, working on his father's Hacksaw Ridge, entering Hollywood with open eyes and accepting everything that comes with the Gibson name. Edward chose the opposite road. He left Hollywood entirely, studied glassblowing at the California College of the Arts, lived for 2 years on a remote island in Fiji, and now runs Natural Edge, a company that makes furniture from reclaimed wood imported from the South Pacific. Edward is the silent answer to the question every celebrity child must face. Is it possible to escape the shadow? And Edward's answer is yes, but you have to go all the way to Fiji to do it. William, born in 1985, lives so privately he is almost invisible to the public. No public social media, no media appearances, only occasionally appearing in a family photo that his brother Milo posts on National Siblings Day. Louis, born in 1988, followed his father into directing, graduating in film production from Chapman University, directing the horror film Happy Hunting and marrying actress Annette Mahendru, once joking that I'm much better looking than him when compared to his father. But Milo, born in 1990, is the child who plays the João Mendes role in Gibson's story, the child who stepped onto the same field as his father, carrying the very name full of glory and scandal, and having to find a way to survive under the largest shadow of all. Milo worked as an electrician before deciding to pursue acting, debuting in his father's own Hacksaw Ridge, then playing Al Capone in Gangsterland, an Air Force officer in Hurricane, and continuing to build his own filmography. Milo has said of his father, "My dad has always been a big cheerleader for doing what you love, and I've done that." But carrying the Gibson name into Hollywood means every interview is asked about the father, every role is compared, every success is suspected of privilege, and every time the father appears in the news for the wrong reasons, it is Milo who has to endure the scrutinizing looks from colleagues on set. Thomas, born in 1999, is the youngest with Robin, the child born when his father stood at the absolute peak, yet raised in the absolute storm. Thomas was 7 when his father was arrested for DUI and screamed anti-Semitic words on every newscast, 10 when his mother filed for divorce, 11 when the audio tapes of his father cursing and threatening Oksana flooded the internet, and no one asked an 11-year-old how it felt when the whole world hated his father, because the world was too busy hating the father to notice the child standing right beside him. Then there is Lucia, born in October 2009, the daughter with Oksana Grigorieva, the child at the literal eye of the storm, the infant present during the violence when only a few months old, held in her mother's arms when her father was accused of punching her mother's face, growing up amid the legal war between her parents with restraining orders and custody agreements, living in the house Gibson bought in Sherman Oaks that, according to the agreement, would be sold when she turned 18 and the proceeds placed in a trust for her. In September 2024, Lucia, then 14, appeared on the red carpet with her father at the premiere of Monster Summer, ordinary moment that should not have needed to be noteworthy. A father going to see a movie with his daughter, yet it was noteworthy because of everything that had come before. Because the very ordinariness of that moment was the most extraordinary thing when placed against the history between these two people. And finally, there is Lars Gerard, born on January 22, 2017, the son with Rosalind Ross, the ninth child, the youngest, the child Gibson, welcomed at the age of 61. Lars was born only days before the Academy announced the Oscar nominations for Hacksaw Ridge, and Gibson said in a statement, "What could be more exciting than listening to the nominations being announced while holding a newborn son?" Lars represents Gibson's final effort to begin an older father with a young child. The 61-year-old man learning to change diapers and staying up for feedings while simultaneously preparing for the Oscars, as if life were giving him a chance to rewrite the first chapter of the fatherhood story once more. Looking at all 9 children, the generational cycle appears with painful clarity. Hutton Gibson passed to Mel an extremist worldview, together with fierce love and uncompromising faith. Mel passed to his children artistic talent, together with the most controversial shadow in Hollywood. And each child must decide for themselves what to carry and what to leave behind from that complicated legacy. Edward chose to leave everything behind and go to Fiji. Milo chose to carry everything and step into Hollywood. Hannah chose to build a private life far from the lights, and Lucia was given no choice at all because she was born already inside the storm. Gibson once told the Sunday Times, "As a parent, everyone makes mistakes. There are no perfect parents, and it's very easy to mess things up. But hopefully I've messed up less than most people." That is the statement of a man who knows he is imperfect, yet still hopes. And in the context of everything he has done and everything his children have had to endure, that hope is both moving and dubious, both sincere and insufficient, just like Mel Gibson himself in every respect. While Gibson tried to be a better father away from the media lights, Hollywood still had not forgotten and had not forgiven. But a film about a soldier who carried no weapon, and a speech from a friend who had fallen into a deeper abyss than even Gibson, would open a path back that no one thought still existed. In 2011, at the American Cinematheque Awards in Beverly Hills, a man stepped onto the stage and did something no one in the audience expected. Robert Downey Jr., the man who had once fallen to the absolute bottom of Hollywood because of drug addiction, who had been arrested sleeping in a stranger's bed while high, who had gone to prison and been erased by the entire industry, yet had been given a second chance and turned it into Iron Man, stood before hundreds of the most powerful stars in America and called on them to forgive Mel Gibson. "Unless you have a very short memory," Downey Jr. said, his voice trembling but firm, "or are too young, you know that I was in a similar situation, and Mel gave me a chance when no one else would. So unless you are a person of extreme compassion, there is no guarantee that you will not need the same kind of tolerance one day." The room fell silent. Downey Jr. was not defending what Gibson had said. He was defending a fallen human being's right to stand up again, because he himself knew better than anyone else in that room what it felt like when the whole world turned its back. That moment corresponded to the night Ronaldinho made the Real Madrid fans stand and applaud, but in the completely opposite direction. Not the enemy bowing before genius, but a friend risking himself to stand in the middle of the arena to protect a friend against the enemy, knowing that he himself could be stoned by association. And 5 years after that speech, Gibson proved that Downey Jr. had been right to place the bet. In 2016, after nearly a decade in the desert, Gibson returned to the director's chair with Hacksaw Ridge, the film about Desmond Doss, a private in World War II who refused to carry a weapon because of his Christian faith, was despised by his comrades and whom his commanders wanted to kick out of the army. Yet in the bloodiest battle of the Pacific on Okinawa, Doss alone crawled across the cliff under fire and lowered 75 wounded comrades to safety, one by one, through the night, without a single bullet in his hands, only with the repeated prayer, "Lord, please help me get one more." The bitter paradox is almost too perfect to be real. The man Hollywood had boycotted for hateful speech was now telling the story of a man who saved enemies through love. The man accused of violence was now honoring a man who refused violence, and the man whose faith the world doubted was now making a film about the purest faith war had ever witnessed. Hacksaw Ridge premiered at the Venice Film Festival in September 2016, and when the lights came up after the screen went dark, the audience rose for a 10-minute standing ovation. Gibson sat in the middle of that sea of applause and wept, not weeping for victory as on Oscar night 1996, but weeping with relief, weeping because after 10 years in the desert, he could still make an audience stand, still tell a story strong enough to pierce every wall his past had built between him and the world. The film received 6 Oscar nominations, won 2 for film editing and sound mixing, and Gibson was nominated for Best Director. The first time in 21 years since Braveheart. He did not win, but the professional comeback was complete, at least on the professional level. And this script must make clear that at least, because a professional comeback is not a moral comeback. Hollywood accepted Gibson back in the director's chair, but the Jewish community still had not forgiven. Seth Rogen called Gibson a ho-ho Holocaust denier on Twitter. The ADL continued to monitor and criticize his every move. Winona Ryder told the press that at a Hollywood party years earlier, Gibson had looked at her and said, "That's right. You're an oven dodger," a slur referring to Jews who survived the ovens. And when Ryder's story was published, Gibson denied it, but the denial of a man who had once screamed, "The Jews are responsible for all the wars in the world," in the back of a police car carried little weight. The darkness still clung, and Hacksaw Ridge did not erase it. It only proved that darkness and genius can coexist in one human being without extinguishing each other. In 2020, Hutton Gibson died at the age of 101. Mel was 64. Hutton had lived long enough to witness his son at the Oscar peak, in the Malibu abyss, and at the Venice comeback. He had seen it all, and he departed carrying with him every answer the world would never have. Losing Hutton, however complex the relationship beyond any single word, was losing the origin in the most literal sense, losing the man who had sown in Mel both fierce love and an extremist worldview, both intense faith and the prejudices the world would use to judge Mel for the rest of his life. And with Hutton's death, every question about the father's influence on the son closed forever without an official answer. Because the only person who could confirm or deny had lain down, and Mel would have to carry that question alone until the end of his days. Then in January 2025, the fire returned. This time not a metaphor, not the fire of rage or the fire of faith or the fire of passion, but real fire, the most devastating Los Angeles wildfire in the city's history. Gibson was in Austin, Texas, recording a podcast with Joe Rogan, and he later said he felt uneasy throughout the session because he knew his neighborhood was burning. Rosalind, Ross, and Lars, their 8-year-old son, were at the Malibu house when the flames erupted. They evacuated safely along with the chickens, but the house Gibson had lived in for 15 years, bought in 2008 for $11.5 million, more than 6,500 square feet, burned to the ground. When Gibson returned, he filmed the ashes, walls reduced to skeletons, 2 fireplace chimneys standing solitary amid the rubble, cars burned black to the bone, a safe standing open and empty, and he said to the camera, his voice strangely calm, "It burned clean, everything to ash. You remember George Carlin talking about stuff? I've been liberated from the burden of stuff because it's ash." Then he touched the blackened car and said, "Still hot." And finally, "I'm fine." You don't look back, you look forward. Throughout Mel Gibson's life, every major loss had carried guilt. The DUI was his fault. The Oksana incident was his fault. The divorce from Robin was at least partly his fault. But the house burned because of a natural disaster, brutal, random, and entirely innocent. Gibson did not light this fire. He did nothing wrong to lose this house. And that is precisely why this is the purest tragedy of his life, the only loss unaccompanied by shame. And the image of him standing in the Malibu ashes becomes the perfect metaphor for his entire existence. A man standing amid ruins, this time not of his own making, looking forward because there is nothing left behind to look at. At the end of 2025, the final loss arrived. Rosalind Ross, his partner of 9 years, 34 years his junior, the woman who had given him Lars and with whom he had rebuilt from the wreckage after Oksana, confirmed the separation in a joint statement. While it is sad to close this chapter, we are blessed with a wonderful son and will continue to be the best parents we can be. Gibson at 69, losing a romantic relationship for the third time, and the pattern repeating with painful clarity. Build, then destroy, then loneliness, then rebuild, then lose again, as if he were condemned to live inside a loop in which every cycle begins with hope and ends in ashes. Gibson entered his 70s, alone, the house burned, 3 relationships dissolved, father gone, mother long gone, yet he still sits in the director's chair, still has 9 children, still has a film waiting for him to finish. As Mel Gibson entered his 70s, his life added one final paradox to the endless chain of paradoxes. In January 2025, President Donald Trump appointed him Special Ambassador to Hollywood alongside Sylvester Stallone and Jon Voight, with the mission of bringing the film industry back to America, meaning the man once boycotted by Hollywood for nearly a decade was now tasked with representing Hollywood itself. The man the industry had once wanted to erase was now asked to save it. And if any single image summarizes the essence of Mel Gibson's life, it is precisely this image. A man always standing in the place no one thought he should stand, always doing what no one thought he should do, and somehow still standing there after everything has burned. While holding that unexpected political role, Gibson still sits in the director's chair. He is preparing the resurrection of the Christ, the sequel to The Passion after more than 20 years, split into 2 parts, scheduled for release in 2027, with Jim Caviezel returning as Jesus. If The Passion of the Christ was the film about suffering and death, about the most brutal 12 hours in human history according to Christian faith, then The Resurrection is the film about rising. Again, about what happens after everything has ended, after the body has endured everything it can endure, after hope has gone out and the tomb has closed. And the haunting question is Gibson, who has undergone so many professional and personal deaths over the past 2 decades, who has watched everything he built burned to the ground at least once, telling the story of Jesus Christ's resurrection, or telling the story of his own resurrection, or both? Or is he simply doing the only thing he knows how to do, sitting in the director's chair and controlling a world on film because the world outside film never allows him to control it? While he prepares to tell the story of resurrection, his son Milo, 35, continues walking the acting path his father pioneered, still carrying the Gibson name into every audition room, still facing questions about his father in every interview, still having to prove that he is Milo and not Mel's son. Milo has said his father taught him, when you work, be honest with the character, and that advice, simple almost to the point of banality, is evidence that the Gibson legacy is not only the headlines about hatred and violence. It is also talent passed down, a love of art sown into the next generation, the small lessons between father and son that no camera ever recorded and no newspaper ever printed. But this script refuses to wrap Gibson's story in a neat bow, because his legacy is a dual legacy, and those 2 halves cannot be reconciled, cannot be added into a tidy sum, cannot be placed on a scale and declared which side is heavier. On one side is the artistic legacy. Braveheart permanently changed the epic genre. The Passion of the Christ is a cultural and religious phenomenon without equal in cinema history. Apocalypto opened a world no one had ever put on screen. Hacksaw Ridge proved that genius does not disappear even after a 10-year boycott. And those films will endure long after every controversy has been buried by time. On the other side is the personal legacy. The anti-Semitic words in the back of a police car, the screaming threats and racial slurs on the audio tapes, the hand that struck the face of a woman holding their daughter, 3 broken relationships, 9 children who must each find their own way to live with their father's shadow, and the wounds he inflicted on people who never asked to be wounded. And those things will not be forgotten either, because the internet does not forget, and the victims do not forget. This script does not conclude that Gibson has been redeemed or has learned the lesson because he is 70 and still sparks controversy every time he opens his mouth. Still admired by half the world and despised by the other half. Still unforgiven by the Jewish community. Still carrying everything, both the glory and the scandal, Both the Oscars and the audio recordings, both freedom and the Jews are responsible for all the wars in the world. This is not a story of redemption. This is a story of continuing despite the absence of redemption, about a man who keeps walking when the world has not decided whether he is a hero or a villain, and perhaps never will decide. Mel Gibson cannot be reduced to a simple story, neither untouchable jihadist nor cautionary tale of self-destruction. He is a human being who has lived at both extremes of human experience. He once stood on the Oscar stage and was exalted by Hollywood as a genius. He also sat in the back of a police car and became a symbol of hatred. Remembering only the glorious victories would whitewash the story and make him less of a person than he truly is. But remembering only the mistakes and controversies would be unjust to the legacy he built with blood and sweat on sets around the world. He did not simply collect film awards, he changed the way the world experiences cinema. In an era when Hollywood grows ever more formulaic with franchises and sequels and computer graphics, Gibson risked everything to remind millions that art can be both brutal and beautiful, both controversial and undeniable, both make you turn away and make you unable to look away. The accumulated losses, father gone, mother gone, wives gone, house burned, love dissolved. The influence of Hutton, the lifelong battle with alcohol, and the fire of rage he never fully extinguished, all combined to create a human being whose artistic talent seemed directly proportional to his personal chaos, as if he had to burn in life in order to shine on film, as if the price of every masterpiece was a portion of life reduced to ash. He does not need to make another film to prove genius. Braveheart and Hacksaw Ridge already belong to history, already carved into the collective memory of humanity. Yet he still does, because the director's chair is the only place on this earth where Mel Gibson controls the world, the only place where the fire inside him burns in the direction he wants, the only place where he is not the drunk man in the back of a police car or the man screaming into a telephone at midnight, but the director who says action, and everything happens exactly as he imagines. The true legacy of Mel Gibson does not sit in an Oscar display case in a house that is burned to ash. It lives in every young director who dares to tell the story every studio refuses, in every audience member who once wept at the sacrifice of Desmond Doss, without knowing that the man telling that story was fighting his own darkness, in every argument that will never end about the boundary between genius and madness, between passion and self-destruction, between art and the human being who creates art. Through every extreme victory, every humiliating failure, every public mistake, every irreversible loss, and the relentless passage of time, the fire inside Mel Gibson has never gone out. It still burns, not because he controls it, but because he has never known how to live without it. When you look back over this entire extraordinary and terrifying journey, what is the first thing that comes to mind? The two Oscars on the stage in 1996, the hateful words in the back of the police car in 2006, or the 70-year-old man standing in the ashes of the burned house, touching the car that is still hot, and saying, "You don't look back, you look forward"? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and help us honor the complexity of the man who made the world both weep and rage, sometimes at the same time, sometimes for the same reason. If this story made you think, please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories about people the world thought it understood, but never truly understood completely. Thank you for staying until the final minute. See you in the next video.